On this edition of Talk to Me, we have Canadian producer, performer, and songwriter Stephen Page. Stephen, thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So you've just released your sixth solo album a couple of weeks ago. Back touring, I believe you just did some dates in the UK and are now doing some North American dates. Happy to be out there again. How is it post-pandemic touring?
Well, I love it. I mean, I love being back on the road, but also I got to admit, I got very used to doing live streams, which is a thing I never wanted to do. The idea before the pandemic of like standing in front of a camera for like a Facebook Live and not having any audience response except for like hearts going by or whatever just seemed like hell to me. Um, and then I started doing these Zoom concerts and I got good at it. Doing a Zoom show and having people being able to see the audience watching on the other side and having them see each other and interact in the chat and that kind of thing was like it made life livable for me for the last 2.5 years. And it really pushed me to do a whole bunch of different stuff creatively I never would have done. Like I've gone back and played every song I've ever written. I've played every album I've ever made in order, covers, written new stuff, all that kind of stuff. So then getting back on the road and you go, oh, now I have to sleep sitting up in the van for 4 hours, or I need to go to the bathroom, but I'm in the toilet's in the same room as the dressing room with 4 other people. Those kinds of things can be a little bit less appealing now that you've had a taste of just being able to be home and sleep in your own bed after a show.
Yeah, and I guess yeah, that's it's funny you point that out because you obviously got used to being at home. You started a whole series. You were doing shows from your basement, live from home, right? So
Yeah.
so that's something that almost like a lifeline. And what I've noticed, I took a look at lots of the lyrics on your new album Excelsior, and just wanted to ask you a little bit about that because I certainly felt some themes about isolation we've all felt, and certainly I assume you wrote it during the pandemic, is my guess.
Yeah. I mean, most of this, a bunch of the songs started before, like were started before the pandemic, but most of them were finished during the time. I was already writing songs, I think, about emotional isolation, at least, and about trying to look outside of myself for answers about, what do we need in order to live a life that feels fulfilled and connected to other people. What do we need from other people, and what do we need outside of ourselves? So whether that's scientific things, whether it's in a song like Human Doll or songs like Infinitely Light Years that are about cosmology, or you have songs that are about interpersonal connections and those things that we might need from each other, whether it's through things like Zoom or romantic relationships. Um, that kind of became the shape of the record. And it's not, I wouldn't call it a pandemic record per se, but it certainly was informed by that. I mean, that's what I was living through while I was making this thing.
Yeah, and you mentioned kind of we've changed a bit. We've gotten used to certain different things, and
Yeah.
I've noticed that too. You get back out again, and you're like, wait a minute, this is actually a pain in the butt. Some of this stuff, but um, have you noticed difference in audiences, and is the audience the same? In live?
There are differences, and that's, I think, and we're seeing this conversation happen more and more openly, which is, I think it's great. I think musicians need to be there for each other when this isn't an easy time. I think we thought we would walk back into live concerts with this sense of jubilation, that there'd be a deeper connection with our audience, which I think many of us have fostered as deeper uh, connection that is based on, like, I think a lot of fans have a closer connection to my process and hearing what I have to say and understanding what it is that I do, which is great. But when you're talking about in-person concerts, one thing is, it took a while. We started doing shows again in the summer of 2021, and then things kind of closed down again. So there was some excitement that summer, doing outdoor shows and stuff, and did a few, but not many. And then things shut down, and then things started to open up, and then everybody in the world is on the road now. So we're all kind of fighting each other for our audiences. On top of that, you have the fact that everything has risen in price. So vans, buses, flights, hotels, gas, everything almost except for concert tickets, or at least what we get paid, our guarantees have kind of stayed the same. So everything's more expensive for us to do. So it's harder and harder to make it actually like break even on the road. And you think, well, why am I doing this? Am I doing this to promote a record that I get 0.27 cents per stream on? Like, how do you make a living doing a thing that I've made a living at for 30 odd years? So it leads to some tough choices. And of course, you don't want to sound like a whiner in front of your audience. Everybody's got it tough. And some people say, well, you don't have to do this, right? You could do something else. But I think that we did learn early in the pandemic that the arts are essential. I mean, what did people do when they were locked down? They watched Netflix. And who makes Netflix? Artists. But all of a sudden, the world opens up again, and the people who make those things that were indispensable are now dispensable. And so I think it's a thing that a lot of artists, particularly touring musicians, are having to grapple with right now. Is it worth it? You know, our audiences have either stayed the same or slightly shrunk since pre-pandemic. And it doesn't feel like, I think we just expected we're going to come out there and it was going to be this great celebration. And it feels a little bit less than that.
Yeah, I get the sense, things may be open, but it doesn't mean people are all going, at least yet, right? So
That's
things
right.
have changed, and
Yep.
that leads me to wonder about, like, it's always a struggle for musicians in any era. To when you got your start, let's say in Toronto, and I'm sure people have asked you about this. Speaker's Corner, I'm not saying that launched you, but do you feel like that was such a great independent show and there was such a good buzz around that corner and that station and that TV, Much Music and all of that? Do you feel there's that type of support, sort of? I know it's a big question, but does that exist anymore in the media, that type of buzz that you can jump on in a city?
It doesn't exist. I mean, what Speaker's Corner is now is Twitter and TikTok mixed together. But think about how diffuse that is. How do you find, like, you're not just going to stumble on it, and it's not curated the way that Speaker's Corner was. That for those who don't remember it, at outside of CTV Much Music, there was this video booth, kind of like a little photo booth, but you go in, you put a loonie in, and you would record a 1-minute video, and then they would inside then take the best of that week and make a best of show. And what Bare Naked Ladies did was we'd go in and, like, we sang our song "Be My Yoko Ono" in the booth and we said, this is our video. We cut down the song to a minute, did the thing, and then the people from Much Music called us and said, this is what we were hoping someone would do. But you really took advantage of this technology, and we're going to run this as a real video in our playlist, which really did help us hugely. But we were the kind of act who would just do whatever it took. We would stand on the street in front of the venue where we were playing that night and busk for 3 hours just to let people know we were going to be inside that night. So for us, it was just another tool that we had. And that very much is a young person's thing too. Like, just being able to use everything you can. So when you see a young artist using TikTok and Instagram and Twitter and YouTube and so on to their advantage, that's the closest you can get. But the fact that the mainstream media, when there wasn't much of a fringe independent media, the fact that they were committed to helping new emerging artists, I think, in a way that nobody is now, was hugely helpful to us. I think having Speaker's Corner, but then Much Music and CBC for us in the early 90s was essential.
Absolutely agreed. So I know you've been obviously up to a lot of different things, right? You've even done like a cooking food show. You're obviously touring right now. You've got the live from home thing going on. So where's your time going to be going over the next 6 months? Are you going to do all of this at once, or are you going to pick a project?
It's hard to know. I mean, I would like to be able to do it all. I still do live from homes when I'm home on a Saturday. And then I've got Stephen Page trio shows touring. I also do like speaking shows. I'm working on actually three different albums at the same time. One of them just finished that'll hopefully be out next year, a project that I'm part of that I can't talk about yet, but it's going to be awesome. If you like classic Canadian pop songs. And I'm doing a follow up to the Vanity Project, a record I did with Stephen Duffy 20 years ago. We're doing a part two now. So I want to get that stuff finished, and I want to get my next record finished. So there's a lot of stuff that I've got to kind of dive into. But sometimes when you get home, all you want to do is just watch some TV for a few days.
What's your favorite show?
Oh, whatever's on. I used to, I do like the Great British Bake Off, but this season has not been great. I've got to find some other passions. I like things that I can either dull my mind with, or otherwise The Rehearsal with Nathan Fielder's The Rehearsal. I think is the best actual show I've seen in years.
Awesome. Listen, Stephen Page, it's been a real pleasure talking with you. Your sixth studio album out now can be found at stephenpage.shop, and it is called Excelsior. Stephen, thanks so much for chatting.
Thanks for having me. Take care.